Okay, the misconception I think that the Muslims have, the Christians have about the Muslims are they assume that the Quran is similar to the Bible because there are passages and there are characters from the Bible that are also mentioned in Quran. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Gina, it's a very easy assumption to make, Teresa, that if you don't think about it, you naturally end up assuming that Christianity and Islam are broadly the same, because Christians, we believe in God, they believe in God, they read the Quran, we read the Bible, we follow Jesus, they follow Muhammad. And what's interesting, that's often the way that comparative religion is taught in colleges and high schools. So a lot of kids grow up and then become adults assuming, well, these are largely the same. And it's hugely that's a massive misconception. We won't deal with the God one here. In fact, I wrote a whole book on that called "The Muslims and Christians Worship the Same God," addressing that one. But on the scripture piece, I mean, the first thing you notice, if you, as a Christian reader, if you actually open the Quran, it looks totally different. It's shorter. It's 114 chapters, 6,236 verses, about the size of the New Testament, but even a little bit shorter than that. The whole of the Quran is written as if it was a first-person speech of God, as if God is speaking the whole way through. The Bible, of course, has different types of writing in it. There are places where God does speak in the first person, like that book of Isaiah would be a good example. But also the Bible has, biography and poetry and hymns and genealogy and history, letter writing, lots of different types of writing there. So the Quran is a very different book in that regard. There's also the time scale is interesting. The Bible was written over something like 1,400 years by 40 different authors, a whole variety of different contexts. And one of the amazing things about the Bible, incidentally, I often say to people, whether I'm talking to skeptics or to Muslims, is that despite that huge range of writers and time scale and everything, the fact there is a unified story comes through the Bible is a kind of miracle in its own right, actually. The Quran, on the other hand, was written over 23 years, purportedly by one person. By Muhammad. Muslims, of course, don't believe the Quran was written by Muhammad. They believe he was the vessel through whom it came. So it's a very different type of book. But the reason Christians can also get thrown is that you open the Quran and you discover names and things biblical figures and biblical stories turn up. The Adam and Eve story is told 7 times in the Quran. Jesus turns up. Abraham, David, the list goes on. And the reason quite simply for that is, when Muhammad was preaching and teaching what became Islam, Muhammad quite simply looked around for religious stories and traditions that people knew, and he picked them up and he built something new out of them. And that sort of can confuse Christians because you assume that the Jesus of the Quran is the same as our Jesus, and he isn't. And actually, I'm a great believer in analogies to help people understand this. And a good analogy would be, my son is 6 years old, and he loves playing with Legos. There's little plastic building bricks that kids love. And so he will build out of his Lego bricks, he'll build a castle, perhaps. And then next day, he'll have demolished the castle and used the same bricks to build a rocket ship. And if I ask, why are medieval knights going to the moon? He would look at me like I'm a lunatic, because he'd go, well, there's no connection. I've just used the same pieces, but it's not the same story I'm telling here. It's a different thing entirely. And the same is true of the Quran. Muhammad is the theology of the Quran, the story of the Quran is totally different. Muhammad simply happened to use Jesus and Moses and Adam and Eve and Abraham, a bit like theological Legos to build his story out of. And what you need to do when you're engaging with Muslims is find ways of bridging them from the Quran to the true story in the Bible. And if you can do that without being derogatory, it can be helpful. One way of doing it is simply to say, there seems to be a lot of the story of, Moses, not there in the Quran, but the Quran does, speak positively about the form of scripture. So, hey, why don't we take a look? Why would you like to have a look at the bigger story of what's going on here and do it positively and invite Muslims to discover more of the story of Abraham, more of the story of Isaac or Moses or Jesus, and try and sort of win them across to the story of the Bible, rather than necessarily attack the Quran.
Yeah. Then on the other side, then the Muslims are confused or misconception about Christianity is the Bible. They think that the Bible is corrupted, that it's not to be believed because we have so many versions, right? I mean, even the English versions, there's just, the list goes on, and even the Chinese version. I mean, so there's so many, whereas Quran, it's in Arabic. It's only one version of Quran, so it has to be true.
Great question. And there's a whole range of things going on there, Teresa. So let's separate the question of reliability from translation for a moment. Muslims will sometimes get confused because they think Bible translations are versions. the reason that's a confusion, in traditional Islam, the Quran is untranslatable. So it's only the Quran in Arabic. The moment you render it in a different language, it's actually no longer the Quran. And so, you know, on the shelf on the other side of my study to here, I have several versions of the Quran in different translations, but on the front, they say the meaning of the Quran because it's not considered a translation. So it's helpful to say to Muslims, look, Christians don't believe that about the Bible. We believe that God is so incredible that actually his word can be translated, excuse me, into any language conceivable. In fact, the first Christians began translating the Bible almost immediately. It was very interesting actually that the New Testament writers chose Greek because they wanted to reach as many people as possible. So you can open up a bit of a difference between, surely, you know, if God is like all powerful and so forth, surely he could have given us a scripture that's translatable into any language, so men and women can be reached wherever. Interesting, you know, the God of the Bible, my God can do that. Why can't Allah? If you wanted to be a little bit polemical. That's the first thing. Second thing you could say is actually, when it comes to manuscripts, many Muslims are actually not aware that there are different versions of the Quran that were sloshing around. If you read the Hadith, which are the traditions about what Muhammad said and did, you know, after that aren't the Quran itself, that they're second in authority to the Quran in Islam. In some of the earliest Hadith traditions, you can read the stories about how the Quran was compiled, and it turns out there was huge controversy. So after Muhammad died in 632, he was succeeded by four so-called rightly guided caliphs who led the Islamic community after him. And the third of those, a gentleman called Uthman, around about the kind of 640s, early 650s, we read in the Muslim traditions themselves that reports came to him that Muslim soldiers out on the battlefields where Islam was expanding and the empire was growing, Muslims were arguing about how the Quran should be read. And in fact, the leader of one of the Muslim generals comes to Uthman and says, you need to sort this out because otherwise the whole empire is going to collapse if Muslims don't agree with the Quran. And there in the Hadith, we read his solution. His solution was to order that every Quran manuscript, whether in parts or whole copies, be brought to him. He commissioned one authoritative version to be made and copies of that to be sent out across the Muslim empire. And then, and this is crucial, then he ordered that all those other early manuscripts be burnt and destroyed. So Muslims are often not aware of that story. I remember using that story in a lecture I was giving at a Canadian university some years ago. And afterwards, these two Egyptian ladies came up to talk to me, quite concerned about this story. And they basically implied that I'd lied and made it up. And I remember saying to them, have you never read this in the Hadith? They went, well, no, we've never read this. So I said, okay, let's have a look at it. I said, what website would you use for the Hadith? I said, I don't want you to use one that I would use. I want you to pick your source. And they said, well, we would use the Muslim Society of America at the MSA's Hadith website online. I went, brilliant. I used the same one, actually. So I said, bring it up on your phone. And I said, put this reference in and pull up this story. And I got her to read it on her own phone, both English and Arabic. And you could see the color drain from her face. And she went very quiet. And I said, your silence tells me you're quite disturbed by this. She went, I am, but why have my leaders never told me about this? I went, well, that is a question you need to put to them. But I said, can you not see the problem here? That you've been told the Quran is completely unchanged and unreliable, but here you have early manuscripts being burnt and destroyed. And for folks listening to this at home, if you want that story, just Google, early Qurans burnt, or go to the SOLAS website. We've got, I think, a couple of talks there on the Quran, and that you can find the details there. It's an amazing story. So yeah, we need to make sure that Muslims understand their own history before they start attacking other people's scriptures.
Thank you.